All right, let's go ahead and get started. So just a few points of administrivia as we are coming down to our final class meetings. Obviously not the last time I see you all. We're just going to have to move to a more virtual format when I'm going to be, a day ahead of you and like in the middle of the night, that kind of thing. So the last points of administrivia are on Monday, I am meeting with the dean immediately after our class. So I will, after I get out of that meeting, then I will have office hours that afternoon if people want to bring their study groups by. Remember that as of Wednesday, we will be done with the lecture portions of the class, and I will be heading to an airport, theoretically, at that point. I'm happy to interface with you digitally as of that point. Just put yourself on my calendar. I'll be on, for the most part after I land, I'll be on New Zealand time, so just run that conversion. Your iPhone, if you just say, like, hey Siri, what's the time in Wellington, New Zealand, it'll tell you what I'm working with. And then just put yourself on my calendar, put yourself and your study groups on my calendar, and if at all possible, I'm more than happy to meet with you. I think that's the only administrivia that I've got. Any other questions from you all on? Yeah.
For like the when you're in New Zealand, do you still prefer us like grouping up and like Zoom calling you? Or
Please, one-on-one Zoom calls, especially because the occasional one, although I'll try not to make too big of a deal of it since it is my job. But like there are going to be some times when I'll be getting up at 2 a.m. to talk to you. I'd prefer to do that for as many people as possible and not like for one person. Yeah.
Is your like Outlook calendar available with all your obligations so you can schedule around it?
It should be for the most part, although every year there are increasing shenanigans. But it's broadly available Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. I am often available. I can do work this weekend. If your study group can meet this weekend, please let me know. That's Saturday or Sunday should be fine. Next week, Thursday will not exist to me. I will lose it over the Pacific. I may be able to take text questions or email questions often. You can get internet as you pass over Hawaii. Once Hawaii's out of range, nothing doing until I'm within range of New Zealand. Any other questions? Fantastic, cool. Then let's pile in. What I'll do is just give us our overview of where we are in the course. Then I'll be taking as many questions as you have for the work that we've done to this point to date. That should be our focus increasingly, using that time for review and for clarification, because you're now moving heavily into outlining mode and you now know questions that you have that you didn't know you had previously. But we do have a few cases to go through, although the reading is getting shorter and shorter now toward the end. And so we'll spend our time on that and then move into the cases that we've got. So what are we doing? Well, we've done the bulk of the class. We've done contract formation, contract formalization, interpretation of both express and implied terms, and then remedies. And now we're dealing with some final thoughts, which oddly enough loop around to the very first classes that we had around things like conditions. So let's say we have a fully formed contract. It's been formalized. We know what the terms mean. The question is, though, whether or not these terms are part of promises that the parties have made to each other in a contract. That's our contract is the law of bargained for exchange. Or whether they are conditions that let the parties out of the contract if they do occur, or if they don't occur, let the parties out of the contract. And so that's what we've been looking at. A condition is an event not certain to occur on which performance of a contract hinges. And the way that we've worked this back into the work that we did at the very beginning of the class is to realize that conditionality could go all the way back and make the contract illusory. Right? If there's a condition and you have full control over that condition, then some courts sometimes may well say, that's beginning to look a lot like, if I feel like it, I will buy the car from you. Well, that's not a promise. That's so within my power that that just doesn't really exist. But then we immediately saw in Empro and Arnold Palmer and a bunch of others conditions that still had some bite, flexibility, discretion that still had some bite. And we said, well, okay, that's not going to prevent the formation of the contract, but it seriously might let the parties to the deal off if that condition doesn't happen. And we talked about the easy example of this, which is, I will buy your house if the termite inspection report comes back all right. Now that's a binding promise. If the termite inspection report comes back and there are termites all over the place, we all have trauma from Weintraub, right? We're not going into the Roach case again, although I just can't leave it in my mind. And so like we have this clear framework where, yeah, if it comes back okay, we're going to be bound to buy the house. And if it comes back problematic, you're not bound to buy the house. And it's clearly not within the power of one of the parties. And so it falls into this clear moment of a condition. The problem is though that conditions contain enormous power. And this is related to our discussion of remedies because I want you to see what's at stake. And it's in some ways the same thing that was at stake in Colfax, or the same thing that was at stake in Raffles versus Wickelhaus, back when we were doing these conditions as even a question of, is there even a contract formed here at all? And the point here is this: if a condition is required for performance to happen, and the condition doesn't happen, or flip it, if the condition does happen, then your performance is excused, like however you want to work that. What it means is that the performance of one of the parties, arguably both, is just off, right? That's very close to the rescission remedy, rescission. Rescission is this remedy you get where you just say, I'm going to undo the contract. I'm going to unmake the contract. We've seen rescission remedies when we looked at like the law of mistake, where the court's like, nope, I'm just going to undo the contract because somebody made a terrible, terrible mistake. That kind of excused performance is really different from, we have to perform the contract, but because of something that happened, it may come out a little bit differently because one party did or did not keep a promise. That's our two characterizations we're going to be looking at. Here it's going to be, are these conditions of a contract that excuse performance? The deal is basically off for one party if the condition occurs or doesn't occur. Or are these promises that the parties have made to each other, and some of the promises that we make to each other are a big deal, and some of the promises we make to each other are not a big deal at all, right? For example, although I was shocked by this, so I was thinking about setting this up and then it happened. I was getting a Christmas gift for somebody that I'm going to take to in New Zealand, and it arrived the next day, like the next morning it had showed up. Apparently I'm not very unique in what I order because Amazon's done predictive algorithms and has the stuff stored at local places and shows up really quickly. But let's say that particular time it was delivered hadn't been important to me. Like let's say I wasn't about to be getting on a plane, right? And it had been delayed and delayed and delayed. The question is that delay in performance, that's a promise. They did promise it was going to be here on Monday, right? But what if they breach? It's not that big of a deal. Or maybe it is that big of a deal if it turns out to be the Thursday after I've left for New Zealand. Right? And so the question of whether something's a promise that somebody's breached, at which point the remedy is to hold the parties to the contract, but just give one party a bit of a remedy for the breach. Like just fix it, not call it off. Fix it, not call it off. So our big practical divide here when we're looking at the difference between conditions and promises is a big one, and it's between call it off or I get it. You did something you weren't supposed to. Was it a big thing? Okay, maybe we call it off or maybe we give full remedies. Was it a little thing? Okay, maybe we just hold the contract to go forward and we just adjust the price a little bit or something else to fix that small problem. Now that's a big divide and courts have an opinion on it. Although then they immediately defer to the ways that the contract sets it up. And that's what we're going to begin to see when we get back into the cases and review Merritt Hill and the others. So if you say condition precedent, a court's going to be very likely to call it a condition precedent. But if you don't call it anything, I think you want to see that the default rule here is the court's going to treat it as a promise rather than a condition, because a condition calls it off. A promise keeps it on. And if the purpose of contract law is to enforce bargain for exchanges because they make everybody more wealthy, then we're not going to be looking for that escape hatch on the regular. There's a thumb on the scales. It's not much of a thumb, but it's a thumb on the scales saying law abhors a forfeiture. They'll call this a forfeiture. They'll say, nope, we're not going to make the condition a condition that just makes one party give up their right to performance under the contract. And often remember that those conditions occur in circumstances in which one party's lost the bet against the universe that they made and is now trying to get out of the deal. And so a lot of the times you're talking about the other party, the party who made a good contract, who made a good bet, saying, hey, enforce my contract. And this other party saying, yeah, but because of the occurrence of some condition, I just get out scot-free. You can imagine how the courts don't love that. And that creates this small thumb on the scales saying, all right, we're going to treat things as a promise rather than as a condition. Because to treat it as a condition would be for one party to forfeit the benefit that they had negotiated for. And so we're not going to do that. All right, that's the framework we're dealing with here. We've gotten to the end of the class. We're looping right around back around to the beginning. We could have taught this right after Lucy versus Zamer. We chose not to. We chose to do it this way. I think you can see why. But with that in mind, let's go ahead and ask any questions you've got about anything in the whole class. This is full exam review. Anything in the full class that you've got up till this point, and then we'll get back into express conditions and move over into implied conditions today. Yeah.
So when you mentioned your Amazon example,
Yep.
so you mentioned how courts it's like a discussion whether or not they're going to hold that
Yep.
the merchant. But I thought, I immediately thought of Baxendale, and I thought it would never hold Amazon liable unless you communicate to Amazon and they agreed that, hey, I need this before I go to New Zealand, or you're screwing me over.
Love it. So first of all, Hadley versus Baxendale is about consequential damages, right? It's not about a promise. But I think the second thing is it was communicated in these cases, right? Like you did say when the thing was going to show up. But here's the part that does need to be communicated. Time of delivery is always a weird gray area in these different things, precisely because of the features I've talked about, right? It's like, it's not important, and the thrust of the contract is the important part until it is important, right? And what they call this is a time of the essence clause. That's the practical way they solve it. If you don't tell the other side that time is of the essence, that I need this because I'm getting on a flight Wednesday night, the 19th, and I'm going to be out of the country. If I don't tell them time is of the essence, then the breach, then the delay in delivery is probably not going to be considered a material breach. That's going to the content that we're going to see in today's class and maybe a little bit next time. But that's the root of that distinction. And the reason that I mentioned time is because it's got these characteristics, right? It could be a little thing, it could be a big thing, and so it's all over the bar exam. That's why I'm doing it. It's because that's got that characteristic. So yeah, you do have to tell them the time is of the essence. Otherwise, the court might take it to just be a small breach, not a big breach. That's looking ahead to what does the other party's small breach of contract do to your ability to enforce the whole contract? Do they get to just breach and then do you still have to perform? Or can you call off your own performance? And that's what we're looking ahead to with this time of the essence clause. Meaning, if they don't get the thing to me, if Amazon doesn't get it to me before I leave for New Zealand, well then, can I just call it off and say, like, okay, you screwed up. I'm going to go get a cover transaction. I'm going to sue you for the difference. I don't have to wait for it to show up and then accept like some major, like a little bit of swag for the, for the difference in delay. Okay, more questions. Anything so far? Yeah, Annika.
Explain the difference between Pareto efficiency, Pareto superior, and Pareto improvement.
Sure. I mean, Pareto improvement, I think, is just going to be a movement from one state to another in which it is a Pareto efficient move. Pareto efficient is the place to start. It just simply says that we're not leaving money on the ground because of transaction costs, because we have enforced a deal, or we've done a deal. The deal is going to work in which at least one party is better off and nobody is made worse off. And it's inefficient if a deal having those characteristics doesn't happen. You can see that a deal where we're all exactly the same as we were before, contract law is not really interested in enforcing that, because every contract has a little tiny bit of friction, a tiny bit of transaction costs. And so if we're not making anybody better off, well then the nature of the world, we had to kill a couple of trees for the paper, and we had to, kill a few neutrons for the energy, and right? There's just that little bit of drag on the system in general. And so if everybody's just as well off as they would have been beforehand, we don't care about enforcing that, right? The question is it Pareto efficient? Have we made the system efficient so that deals where at least one person's better off and nobody's worse off stand? Pareto superior is just, yeah, we got there. One person is, in fact, it is superior. One state of affairs is superior to another state of affairs if there is a trade that could be made that would make at least one person better off and nobody else worse off, right? By the way, if you want to take this to the end, and if anybody is tired of this economic stuff and looking for, where does it stop? Doesn't this system, are we really going to believe in free markets, Homo economicus, and the Yeti? What kind, the invisible hand and other spirits? Let's try this. Pareto optimal. A Pareto optimal situation is different from Pareto superior. It's the situation in which there are no trades. There are no trades that can be made that would make at least one person better off and nobody else worse off. The problem is there's only really one confirmed way of getting to Pareto optimum within a society, and that's, the king owns everything and nobody else owns anything. Can you see that? Then anything that the king gives away, the king is worse off and nobody else has anything to trade to the king, right? So keep that in the back of your mind. This is not a system that tends towards democracy, right? This is a system that tends towards efficiency, and those are not at all the same thing. But that's our echelon. Pareto efficient, Pareto superior, leading all the way up to Pareto optimum, which is just useful as a thought project to go, oh yeah, that's a situation in which there are no further gainful trades that can be made. Question. Follow up on that, or? Great, cool. More? Yeah.
Could you distinguish breach from repudiation and then talk about when repudiation is sort of undoable?
Sure. So repudiation is breach of contract before the time for performance has come. Now, we will get into that some, but it is, let's say that somebody has until Wednesday to get me a widget. And on Monday, they say, I'm sorry, we are out of widgets, we are breaching the contract. Now, you need to understand two things about that. That is a breach of contract. Why? Because the contract was fully executory. An executory contract means a contract that's been formed, but has not yet been performed. There are contractual obligations. Somebody should probably remind Judge Easterbrook that if I promise a certain amount of money to a firm and they promise a computer to me, we actually have a contract at that point. It's not like we're waiting until the terms and conditions come and I can sit in front of the fire with a glass of wine and read through the conditions and then the contract is formed. No, remember, we have a contract straight up and it's fully executory, meaning it's formed. And if I don't pay the money, breach of contract. And if they don't show up with the computer, breach of contract. But when you breach an executory contract before the time for its performance comes, that's what we call a repudiation. Sometimes we call it, just to remind us of that, we call it anticipatory repudiation. It's a repudiation that happens in anticipation, seeing we're going to notice the performance isn't going to happen. And then there's a big real world overlay on top of that. Like that's an easy enough concept, but in the real world, no one ever calls you up and's like I'm not going to perform. What they do is they start weaseling and they start delaying, and the payments get slower and slower, and performance gets slower and slower. And you're left going, are you gonna perform? Like, I don't know if you're gonna perform. I need to know whether you're gonna perform. And so a lot of the work of a lawyer is actually forcing that repudiation by sending them various nasty grams to say, hey, like we have a problem, you need to get it fixed, and if you don't, we'll treat it as a repudiation of the contract so that we can go ahead and sue. For upper level and bar exam, there are some further questions of when the contract is breached. Those go to harder, advanced questions on remedies. Yeah, Larry.
Could you go over efficient breach theory and how that affects judges when they're making their decisions?
Sure. So the idea is that a contract is we'll just use Oliver Wendell Holmes' formulation. A contract is either a promise to perform or pay. It's not a promise to perform no matter what. It is a promise to perform or pay, and sometimes that payment can be efficient if, as Annika pointed out, if the breach of the contract leaves one party in a better position than they would have been in, absent the breach, right? And the other party is as well off, is not worse off. The problem with that immediately is this. Well, we go with the benefit of it and the problem with it. All right, the benefit of it is that it gives parties needed flexibility in contracting arrangements. No divorce judge will order the parties to stay married. It's not ever happening. And if you've ever been involved in commercial litigation, forcing companies that hate each other's guts to continue working together is a disaster in the making. Now that's just a gut level. That's not the top level reason why they don't do this. It's just a gut level. I just want you to feel it in your bones, how it can be efficient to just okay, I get it. Y'all aren't working well together. Let's just settle this with money between the parties and knock it off, right? So that's why there can be efficiency gains, and just having had Annika's read on Pareto efficiency, we can see how efficient breach could work, right? The breaching party is better off, and the other party is supposed to be made whole, and therefore is no worse off than if the contract was performed. Now there's about 4 different reasons why that's bananas, or at least things you can say in the opposite. We're not in the place where one side's right and one side's wrong. The reason we do this is because these are arguments that come out all the time, and you should just be prepared with the standard move and counter move, right? It's going to be like fencing. You're just oh yeah, I see what you're doing. Okay, cool. Here's where this goes. And there's at least 2 distinct problems with efficient breach. The first is, like all of these arguments with efficiency, it's if there are no transaction costs, well, okay, look, the universe is nothing but transaction costs. This is bananas. What's the if in efficient breach? If the non-breaching party is made whole, okay, but that's what our whole lawsuit is. That's not a cost-free move. We cost somebody's kid's college education to pay us for a couple of weeks of our time. We do not come cheap. The idea that somebody has to sue and then they're made whole, they have not been made whole. So the entire idea then becomes a little bit nonsense, because the real world doesn't work like that, because you're talking about breach of contract. If it would work that way, by the way, what you would expect, and one of the ways to look at it is the only real efficient breach cases are the ones that never go to court. Why? Because the party that's about to breach calls the other party and is hey, look, I've got this other opportunity over here, which I'm not going to tell you about, but because I sell these things, and I know I promised to sell them to you, but because I sell these things, I've actually had an inquiry to get it from somebody else for a whole lot more. Now I'm willing to cut you in on this. Why don't I cut you a little bit of the extra here, and then you can take delivery a couple of months from now, and we both make out like bandits. That's efficient breach. Now we are talking, right? That whole thing worked out. But that is not how this ever works in court, because that conversation didn't happen because we're in court, right? Because by definition, the parties didn't do that. So that's level one of being like sarcastic AF about efficient breach. The other problem with efficient breach is this. Remember I said like a system is efficient if one party is better off and nobody else is worse off? Somebody tell me why the breaching party should be the one that's better off. Like let's consider our example of we have a seller of generators and they've got a contract to sell generators, and then a hurricane hits the southern coast and generator prices go through the roof. The question is, why should the seller, who's the one breaching this contract, why should the seller be the one to capture that massive rise in market prices for generators? Why wouldn't the buyer, who had the foresight to have a contract to buy a generator, they were the ones, remember, who was betting that the price of generators was going to go up in a week? The buyer was. Who was betting that, right? Who was betting that they needed to offload it now because the price was likely to go down? The seller was. Every transaction is a bet against the universe. And let's be clear, who was betting what? The buyer said, you know, if I wait a week, I might have to pay more, right? So the buyer is the one that locked in that price. The buyer is the one saying, I think that the price of this is going to rise. This asset may go up. And why would you remove the buyer's benefit of the bargain? If contract law is the law of bargain for exchange, and if what you are trying to do is give each party the benefit of their bargain, why would you give the rise in value to the seller rather who's breaching and who already gave away that right to the rise in value? Why would you give that away? Why would you give that to them rather than the buyer who had the foresight to do it? And that is captured in our tension between efficient breach in contract law and what we'll call opportunistic breach of contract under the restatement third of restitution and unjust enrichment, where we say, you know what, that's you, seller, when you breached and you got that huge payday and you didn't share it with me, you actually sold my generator when you did that. The rise in value should have been mine. We're going to make you disgorge those profits. We're going to make you hand over under unjust enrichment those profits. And that's a very controversial remedy. I got to say, they put it in the restatement third of restitution and unjust enrichment. It was not heavily grounded in common law and case law. It was a bit controversial at the time, but you should be aware that tension is still there. And now you know how to operate it either way. You can either say efficient breach. We need to preserve it. And we know we need to preserve it. We see that in our rules around specific performance. A court will almost never order the parties to actually do it. We can see it in our rules around liquidated damages. The courts are already smart to the idea that you can say, look, perform the contract or pay $1 trillion. Although I guess now $1 trillion's on the table now that like Elon's gotten a payday. But like $1 trillion, right? The idea here is that would be a penalty. It's completely unrelated to the actual or anticipated damages that the parties face. And so the penalty is purely there to force the parties to perform. So we can see in contract doctrine all the time, all of these rules that preserve the capacity for efficient breach. But we can also then raise arguments and raise points saying, yeah, but that's not actually how it works. And even if it were how it could have worked, they should have picked up the phone and worked this out. They didn't do that, so we're not really in an efficient breach scenario here.
Do they, I'll be on the side of the generators to the supplier because it's more like economically beneficial for them to benefit?
Yeah, like I love the pushback, right? The question then is, okay, fine, but in a rising market, who is going to realize more gain on the transaction? Often the buyer has bought it to install it in their basement. The seller's busy selling it. The seller's the one that's got the opportunities. The seller's the one that's got the best capability of realizing the market value of this, of getting the resource to its highest valuing user. Because that's the purpose of the market, is to get the resource to the person who values it the most. And so the seller's in a better position to do that. That's exactly why. Like that's the exact pushback. Yep.
Wouldn't that be a Cowboy Hicks argument?
It is if you push back hard enough on the cost of making the buyer whole, which is going to be prohibitive. So you can transform it into Caldor Hicks. Although between sellers and buyers, if they're both commercial entities, like why do we think one's better off than the other, et cetera?
You may have kind of answered this, but I was wondering if we have to worry about kind of inverse efficient breach where the price goes down.
Yeah.
The buyer says, I'm not
Oh, it's efficient breach no matter who's doing it. I'm just showing you sellers because that's how that tends to roll. But let's say that the price massively goes up, right? And we can all imagine goods that we're planning on buying, and then 3 weeks later, like, have you seen the price of really top end, steak at Aldi? Holy shit. So if it goes up like that, right? And the buyer breaches, there's every argument that that's an efficient breach. You're just going to have to play it out. Yeah, pleasure.
What kinds of damages can be disclaimed in a contract?
You can love it. You can, and parties do disclaim consequential damages as a damages type. They also disclaim things like special damages because that means consequential damages. Beyond that, though, it gets harder because you're not disclaiming damages anymore. You're disclaiming promises and warranties. It is very possible to be sued under a breach of contract action and not pay any money. But it's because you didn't breach, because you didn't make any promises. That's what all those disclaimers are. So the problem is we've got two kinds of disclaimers, and they're usually put in the same paragraph to make it worse. One kind of disclaimer is a disclaimer of a type of damages, consequential damages, and it's okay to disclaim consequential damages, to say, nope, we're not accepting consequential damage. On the other hand, the rest of the disclaimers, disclaiming direct damages, you don't really, if you did that, I suppose if you effectively did that, you just wouldn't have a contract, right? There's just there's no recourse. The one way to look at that is you're eliminating contractual promises, and that's where your disclaimers are going to be going. They're going to be disclaiming the warranties, not disclaiming damages. Does that make sense?
Are incidental also in with consequential? They would be disclaimed?
In some circumstances, you can disclaim incidental damages. They try. In other circumstances, courts won't let you because it's considered part of your just direct damages in arranging an alternative transaction.
So, maybe I got the wrong, main idea from that film, but I wrote down that just because a contract is unfair, it's not unconscionable.
Yep.
But then, in the case where that mother was
Yep.
all those appliances,
Yep.
that was unconscionable.
Yes.
So can you bridge that gap and help me draw that line?
Absolutely. The difference was because now in bad films you had a bunch of industry insiders who absolutely knew what the deal was. With the little old lady who got her door kicked in, she didn't know anything about solar water heaters or in Walker Thomas furniture, right? The market wasn't clear to her. She wasn't an industry insider. There was some sense of being forced, right? Being constrained in the process, either in the solar water heater case by having the door kicked in and the salesperson who wouldn't leave in Williams versus Walker Thomas furniture. It was that because of the impacts of collateral on interest rates, she wasn't able to get the loan at the same interest rate anywhere else. And that convinced the court that she had no option to go elsewhere, but we sort of interrogated that and we're like, well, wait a minute, hang on a second. Doesn't that mean this is the best deal she's likely to get in town and that sort of thing? But it's that sense of coercion and then power equality in bad films, which this is not unconscionable, versus power asymmetry, power inequality in William versus Walker Thomas furniture or in the solar water heater case.
So it's much more of a policy thing, unconscionable.
Unconscionability is where we start talking about whether something's fundamentally fair, whether it's a deal so completely unfair that it shocks the conscience in both the method that it was secured, that's procedural unconscionability, and the result that was obtained, that's substantive unconscionability. But yeah, no, we're starting to talk about contracts as if they're fair or not. Talia.
I sound more like an outline.
Yep, fire away.
Do you know exactly, I know every case talks about issues from different parts, but do you know exactly where each case goes from formation to formalization?
Yeah, formalization gets really short shrift in the book. It's not a big deal here. It's our statute of frauds stuff and our parole evidence rule stuff. That's our formalization requirements. Statute of frauds is like peak formalization, and therefore it's like just a blip in the book. The reason I raise it is because The bar exam and my exam and your practice love, and I mean love, to mistake formalization questions for formation questions. And for terms questions. They love doing things like sending a statute of frauds writing. Like I send you a statute of frauds writing in your email, to your W&L email. I send you a statute of frauds writing that is signed by me, and therefore within 10 days, because you are a merchant, because you have knowledge of specific rules of commercial procedure, within 10 days you didn't respond to it, right? So you lose your statute of frauds defense. But do you think for a split second you've lost your ability to defend that breach of contract by saying, I've never seen this? Like I've never seen this in my life. I didn't agree to anything. I lost my statute of frauds defense. But I didn't agree to the contract. There was no offer, acceptance, and consideration. Do you see that? The bar exam loves to get you confused between formation and formalization. That's why I unpack it. But formalization, as you see in this book, is just like this statute of frauds. It's just really that stuff. And then there's parole evidence. Once you run into that statute of frauds writing, there's some questions of like, what if we said something before we had a statute of frauds writing? Can you get that thing you said past the writing? So there's a little bit of that as well. I want to make sure I've got everybody else. Yeah, Nate, go for it.
Question about now Reforms 207.
Yep.
Particularly Gardner Zemke versus Dunn and Bush. Was
Yep.
that kind of presented just to show us that this can happen, or is there kind of a bigger implications how 2207 is applied?
What I need you to take out of 2207 is the roadmap. I mean, I want you to see how it works overall. And Gardner Zemke does have some little strange doctrinal twists of it, right? Like it adds that not only does it have to be a my way or the highway clause, but it has to be a my way or the highway clause in which the other party expressly is held to have assented to the my way or the highway clause. And you could see how the court didn't really want to engage with the my way or the highway problem by expanding the set of requirements. That's weird. That's weird. Like normally speaking, if there's a my way or the highway clause on my exam, on the bar exam, and your practice, go down to 2207.3. You do not have a contract on the writings. So if you want to learn that from that case, great. But like that masquerades as the point of the case. Really the point of the case is just showing you how 2207 rolls. Anything else? Yeah.
Could you explain and square away under the UCC when revocation is acceptable for a non-conforming good as opposed to rejection?
Oh, brother. I can.
You don't have to.
Okay, well, look, here's the deal. I think I can make it easy. It's really important for two reasons. It's actually important because I'm just going to give it the black letter law real fast. But then also, I want you to see something important about how this works with Easterbrook. So we're talking about acceptance, revocation, and that's a different kind of acceptance. That's the first confusion point. We've talked about offer and acceptance in forming a contract. That's one thing. However, acceptance in the context of revocation of acceptance is something completely different. And what it says is essentially, are the goods okay? And the standard for revocation is a two-part standard under the UCC. Under 2601, if the goods aren't perfect when you get them, then you have a right to revoke. You're just like, nope, I'm out. You've rejected the goods. All right? That's rejection. You can reject on any standard. However, if you accept the goods, and that means you use them for any appreciable period of time that is not necessary to just test them out, you change their condition, or you tell the other side that you have accepted them. Those are your three categories under the bar exam. You either use it for a period of time not necessary to test it, right? You change its physical condition, drill holes in it is the thing they always look for, or like they paint it or something on the bar exam, right? Or you tell the other party, yeah, I've accepted it. Once you've accepted it, you can't reject it. And so you must revoke your acceptance under a different standard. Now that different standard is in 2608. What that standard says is this, that it can't be any flaw. It has to be something that substantially interferes with your use and enjoyment of the contract. It has to be a bigger deal. Now I'm simplifying like a madman here. You'll need to take upper level sales, and you should, because this stuff will be on the bar, but we just don't have time to get into 2612 and the rest of this stuff right now. But what I want you to see is that's a hard system, but here it is. When you get something from Amazon, it has to be perfect, or you can send it back. If you accept it and use it, drill holes in it, or say, yep, great, and pay for it, and then you find the problem a couple weeks later, you have to revoke your acceptance. You can't just reject it. You have to revoke your acceptance, and that is on a different standard. The two standards are this. As soon as you get it, it's called perfect tender. Write it down. Perfect tender. Tender must be perfect. And then if you keep it for a while and try to revoke your acceptance, then that's called substantial impairment. It's a much harder standard to meet. You get a computer and it's got a chip on one of the footies underneath the computer. Perfect tender? Send it back. Substantial impairment? Nah. No way. I need you to see two things about that. That's a very specific area of law. It's really neat because it's going to help us see what we're going to get into in these cases. It is an example of a condition. These are conditions. It is a condition of the buyer's obligation to pay for goods that the goods arrive in perfect condition. It is a condition of the buyer's obligation to pay for the goods if the buyers kept them for a while. It is a condition of their obligation to pay for the goods that they have no uncured material substantially impairing flaw. It's the same framework we're going to see when we get into implied conditions in the cases. I just want you to see how that maps to the UCC. As usual, the UCC's got this sharp-edged regime, but you can map it under the common law, and seeing it in each way makes the other one clearer as to what's going on. A little thing going wrong, you can kill it if you kill it as soon as you get the thing. A little thing goes wrong, and you kept it for a couple of weeks, you're sunk, and that is what they will put on the bar exam. There's a lot more to that, take upper level sales. Like there's a minute, but that's all we got for now.
That's like the amount of time until it's no longer like perfect tender. Is that a court interpretation, or does UCC just have like a...
Oh man, why you gotta ask me real and hard questions? Look, the amount of time is the amount of time necessary to test it.
So I feel like UCC would have provisions for that.
Preach. Oh, they do in industry custom and practice, right? Because that's what the UCC loves. It loves it. It loves some industry custom and practice. Let me put it this way. I've seen courts say, nope, it was too long when you used a computer for 10 minutes after noticing the flaw. Any use after noticing the problem counts as you've given up your rejection right. So that's one story. Here's another story. I've seen a company that had a whole robotic installation system for cars that was installing headlights for cars. And they pushed their rejection right out for months, saying, yeah, we've just been trying to see if we could get it to work, like it's necessary to test it. What do I tell my students? Stretch it, right? Stretch the time out, compact it. That's how you win the case, is by understanding the arguments and by stretching and compacting. Great. That is an upper level question. All right, anything further, y'all, before we get into these cases? Okay, I've got Graham and Scott. Yeah.
Can you just walk through new versus old unconscionability?
Sure. So you can't do, like, here's where I get in trouble. You can't do old unconscionability without like a fake British accent, right? Like you have to say things like, no gentleman would propose and no sane person would accept, right? Like it's very much that kind of, your honor kind of business. It shocks the conscience. No decent human would do it. No decent human would propose it, and no non-desperate human would take it. That is not at all how new unconscionability works. New unconscionability is like, yeah, this is in this contract because it's in every contract. It's about arbitration. It's about the terms of the arbitration and the terms under which the fall of the Republic truly got underway because we forced humans systematically out of court. And the question is, how far down that path are we willing to go? And that path has progressed a lot. Remember, when I became a lawyer, I talked to lawyers who are like, no, you can't give up your right to go to court. That's insane. That would be giving up your basic right for recourse in constitutional democracy. Obviously, no sane country lets you do that. No other sane country lets you do that. The United States, whether or not we're still sane, does let you do it. So that's that whole revolution where we took contracts and we made them their dark, black mirror opposites. Right? Contracts used to be about bargain for exchange. When's the last time you bargained in an Amazon contract? They used to be about securing benefit to both parties. You know, when Uber hits you with huge surge pricing because they want to extract more money out of you, you're not at all sure that's happening here. So it's about that revolution. That's what new unconscionability is grounded on. It's grounded on this attack on arbitration clauses, whether you like them, and you must use them for your clients while we work to fix the country, right? But you still have to use them. But whether or not, it was one of the only ways through. It's one of the only ways through those arbitration clauses that's put huge pressure on unconscionability doctrine and has caused it to mutate. And so it's no longer about, did you sell a little old lady a water heater? It's a lot more about, did you set up the rules of this alternative court proceeding in a way that systematically disadvantages one party from being able to vindicate their legal rights? Scott.
Yeah, do you mind just saying the black letter law for Simeon?
Sure. I mean, well, let me make sure I've got my restatement provisions correct here. And yeah, this is the way my day's been going. My glasses broke just before this, so that's why I'm holding these up. I want to make sure I get it right because there's a parallel case in another class that goes over some of the stuff in Simeon, but then it's not in there. Okay, so there's a couple of things from Simeon. The first is that the court ordered that there be no incidental damages separate from the cover damages because the costs of cover include incidental costs of setting up the alternative transaction. Okay, just remember you either get incidental damages as part of your cover costs or you get your cover costs plus incidental damages, but you don't get it twice. Not a big deal. That's holding one. Holding two is there's no requirement of covering, but if you don't cover, then you don't get consequential damages that could have been mitigated by cover. That's 2715. We know that. That's Hadley versus Baxendale, but written into the code. This is similar to Liam's question about how does the code do it versus how does the restatement do it. And here we see the Hadley versus Baxendale rule in 2715. And then I guess the last thing that's interesting about this is that it's, they didn't cover. Remember, he didn't cover. And so then the question was, well, could he have covered and prevented these extra damages? And the answer there was probably not, because the only way he could have covered was by buying the cars from the person who screwed him. And the court wasn't going to require him to raise extra money to do that. That's bananas. And so then the question became, well, what do we do about these consequential damages? And how do we do a hypothetical 2713 market remedy when you didn't cover? Why didn't you cover? We couldn't find the cars. So when you don't cover, then what do? Well, you create a hypothetical market cover. That is, what's the difference between the market price and your contract price? If the market price went up, but then we just have a hard problem of determining, and here's the real kicker for the bar exam, my exam, and upper level sales classes. Fine, what's the market price that we're talking about here? This was a question of thick and thin markets. Right? What's the market price? How do we know? And there's a lot that goes into the determination of the market price that we do not have time to talk about in this class, but it's coming. Among other things, repudiation plays a big role. The market is, for some contracts, the place where you were going to take delivery of the goods, but the time when it was repudiated. Why? Because when they repudiate, that's when you need to get off your rocker and go arrange an alternative transaction. You can't just let the market do what the market's going to do at that point, right? So these questions do relate. I'm not going to do that to you in this class, but just be aware you need to know those answers before you try to take the bar. Yeah. Man.
So when they try to create the hypothetical in a thin market, they'll just use the contract price.
They might use the contract price, like they might use, right? We saw that in TVA, right? What else are they going to do? Like, they don't know what these things are worth. They have no idea. This is our subjective versus objective theory. And in thin markets, subjective theories just predominate. It's much easier to do 713 if you've got a thick market.
I have a question regarding Simeon.
Yep.
Or when they actually calculated the damages.
Yep.
Value.
Oh my God, you had to ask that question. Yeah, brilliant. Go for it.
Why did the court decide to do it at the time of the lawsuit after it's increased by millions of dollars rather than when the initial person that screwed him over sold it for like 1.1 million?
Yep. And can we pick any other times?
I mean, yeah, there's a ton of different times.
Yeah.
But they just picked the one latest down the line that would net him.
Yeah, and you're like, why?
Yeah.
Right? And the answer is probably because the court was mad. But also, like, why pick, like, the argument is we're going to do it as if this were my car, right? As if you'd given me this car and it was actually my car and I'd sold it at the perfect time. But would I have? Who freaking knows? Right? The problem with thin markets, then you've got thin markets into the future, right? What you need to know is the fight about that. Find a range of times, realize how that's going to affect the recovery, because this is not going to be expectation measures. This is going to be a disgorgement remedy of damages. They're going to have to cough up the money that they made by not following through on this, if we take that to be the market price. Same, by the way, it's the same analysis for specific performance. This is how specific performance cases work out in reality. Remember, if this were a specific performance case, the order would be like, these are your cars. Sure, but the cars have been sold on to like 8 other people since then. The cars are like, in different places all around the world at this point. So what are you going to do? You're going to pick a damages remedy saying, well, okay, they were really the plaintiff's cars when the defendant sold them. So maybe they want that price when they sold it. Maybe, though, the market went up even higher and we want that perfect price of the market. Or maybe because we think that the non-breaching party wouldn't have perfectly timed the market, because if you can perfectly time the market, call me. I would like to ride your coattails and we will be rich soon, right? We're going to ride that AI bubble till it pops. And, right, so there's the time that there's the time that they sold it. There's the time of the market peak during the pendency of the litigation. And then there's the time of the litigation. And all you're doing is just sort of trying to give the court different reasons for different points in time.
So typically, like, the worse of an actor the defendant is, the more favorable the court will interpret your timing.
Yeah, and also the thicker the market. Again, this is such a thin market case. The answer is very, very clear in 2713. It's the time and place for tender, where the seller was supposed to come up with the goods, the place, and the time of performance of the contract. That's when you measure your market. Literally on the bar, they will be like, somebody's in Tampa, somebody else is in Chicago. They agree these different things. And you're like, okay, look, delivery was supposed to be in Chicago on December 12th. That's when I check market prices in a thick market to find out what that hypothetical market price is going to be. Can you see how different that is for a thick market? Yeah. So they don't just use the contract price, right? Because another market price might be the actual market price that the breaching party got when they sold. That would be another market price. How are we picking them? Well, in a super thin market, we're picking them largely because the court has pissed somebody off. In a thick market, it becomes very, very definable and very, very testable. It's the place and time for performance under the contract. That's when you check the market. Yeah.
How does that work in international transactions with different currencies? Do they still do that?
Yep. And for cross-border transactions too. The place and the time, it gets harder. Again, these are upper-level questions. I love how far you guys are going. If you can get it for cheaper across the border, that's still considered to be a place and time. Like if I'm in a border state, a border city, and like there's a very close, I can get it from Toronto at much cheaper, and then it costs me, I don't know, a certain amount of money to get it to Chicago. Well, then the Toronto price plus the shipping costs to Chicago become your Chicago market price. But other than that, yeah, you look for the market at the place and time for performance of the contract. That's your big, normal 2713 market price. Simeon screws everything up because it's ultra thin. All right. These are great questions. We have taken an hour. I think it's well worth our time and energy to do this so that we are weeding out. Is there anything else that's going to keep somebody up? Not able to get it done? Yeah, Justin? Well, that's going to keep somebody up. We do. It's right here. Thanks for reminding me. Any other questions on the substance? Cool. All right. Then let's move into the cases. We've done Merritt Hill mostly. I just want to remind us what we're doing in Merritt Hill. Right, we've got a promise is restatement second. We're already back to the beginning of the class. Right? A promise is a manifestation of an intention to act or refrain from acting in a certain way. And a condition is an event not certain to occur, which must occur before performance is due. And we've got then a case where the court's like, they said it was a condition, so it must have been a condition. Not rocket science. And then the pushback is, well, wait, hang on a second. If that's a condition because they said it was a condition fully within the power of one of the parties, why wouldn't that render the whole contract illusory, right? If the one party is saying, hey, let's see, what's the difference? Everybody understands it's not illusory if I say I'll buy your house if the termite inspection report comes back, okay. But how about, I will buy your house if I decide to go get a termite inspection report? See the problem? Okay, that's Merritt Hill. I don't think we need to talk about it any more than that, unless somebody's got a question about it. It's pretty rules as written for express conditions. Okay, then let's move on to Howard, which is a bit of a rough one. Graham, I'm wondering if you could set it up for me, and then I'll ask Liam to take the other side of it.
Yeah. So basically, the plaintiff grow tobacco on their land, and the lands are severely damaged by rains, and so they file with their insurer, the FCIC, and basically in that time they can harvest and sell the remaining crop so they can basically plant a new crop. And when the representative for the insurance comes out, he denies coverage because in the contract, one of the things says they won't plow over until there's an inspection, paragraph 5F, I believe. And then basically the Howards sue, and the district court says that 5F was a condition, not a promise, and and they basically say that because in 5B it said condition proceeding, and in 5F there was no, they construed from the language of the contract, and because it wasn't stated in 5F, they did not view it that way.
Okay, perfect. And let me just ask you this. What's the difference in this case between a promise and a condition? What happens if we treat, there was damage to the crops, right? They plowed it under, okay? The question is whether or not plowing it under was a condition that had to be satisfied before the insurance company was liable to pay, or whether it was a promise by the farmer. The farmer's like, I promise, as a matter of offer, acceptance, and consideration, mutual benefit exchange, I promise that I won't plow it under. What's the result? That's the main thing I need you to see out of the case is, what's the difference in court between treating this as a condition and treating it as a promise?
If it's treated as a condition, they basically forfeit the policy. Right. If it's treated as a condition, then
as a promise, you mean?
If it's treated as a promise, then you can just recover the damages, but you don't lose the policy.
But you don't lose the policy, right? And so there's this big What's lurking in the back of the case is these farmers are about to lose their policy. And the question there is a rough one because, as we know, the insurance industry is everyone's favorite industry. I don't understand how this got off. I don't know any other industry where you basically pay them for them not to provide you with a good or service. That's exciting. But that's more or less the model that they do. And the question is whether or not the court's going to do that. Now, I say that about the insurance industry for a reason, which is something that's lurking in the back of this case, although, and you should be aware of it, although you shouldn't make too much of it in this course. But this is so true of the insurance industry in particular that we actually have changed a lot of the law around interpreting contracts for insurance contracts. It used to be that we would have like in each section of this course, we would have a common law case, an old common law case, that should sound familiar. And then we would have like a modern UCC case, and we would have a labor or land or some other restatement case. And it used to be then we would also sometimes, 3 or 4 times, have an insurance case. So we would see how insurance would work out against each of these other things. I just got to tell you, insurance plays very, very differently. And so if you want to know why the court's doing what it didn't do at Merritt Hill, right? It says condition precedent. The court's like it says condition precedence, condition. Court's not going to do that here. The real answer why is because we are now in construing an insurance contract, and the whole groundwork of interpreting the contract is going to grow out of that, to the point where we have profoundly different rules. Like the guy who wrote the UCC, or big chunks of it, Carl Llewellyn, was this giant of the common law. I had to read Carl Llewellyn's Bramblebush. My mom made me read Carl Llewellyn's Bramblebush before I went to law school. That's how, that was the big darn deal. He was a huge figure. And he basically said, yeah, we're just gonna do insurance contracts completely different from all other kinds of contracts. For example, here's a huge shift. In an insurance contract, in many jurisdictions still, if a clause is in it that is surprising to the person who signed it, then it's not applicable. Right? Like that's alternate reality for contract law. Can you imagine doing that to Easterbrook? Very, very, very different. So that's one place where we're going to ground this. I want to give you a little background of insurance law so you can understand what's going on here. Which way do you want this? That is, this is a condition or this is a promise? You're going to go with it's a promise. Okay, it's obviously a condition though, right? Like just, here we go.
We said it's a condition.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Like, says so right there, Your Honor.
And furthermore, it is a material part of our promise, or not of our promise, of our contract.
Well, hang on. I love this layered stuff here. So it's a material part of the contract. You're getting into a different argument. Okay. This is good. No, it's great. It's still a condition. It's just leading up to another set of arguments that we're about to get deeply into. What's this idea that, all right, fine, look, one, it's a condition because the parties know how to say the word condition, and they did. And the court's doing all kinds of mental backflips to be like, yeah, but not in paragraph 1432. Like you can just see the court doing backflips. So that's one thing. But the second part here is this, what is this materiality argument? How does that turn into a conditions argument? Well, first of all, tell me why it's material. Tell me why it's important, really important, not just kind of important, really important that they not plow the damn stocks under.
Just kind of as a general reason, it's because we need this condition to make sure that we give appropriate damages and people aren't committing insurance fraud. So,
yeah.
As a policy, we want that to happen.
How do we? Let's try that. How does this clause? I have to be very careful about how we're talking about it. How does this clause? I'm not calling it a condition. I'm not calling it a promise. How does this clause bear on your ability to detect fraudulent behavior?
It helps it a lot. Otherwise, anyone could just say, "Hey, my crops were, they failed."
Not going out very well, a little diesel fuel, right? And, right? And then you plow it all under so that the person can't come along and be like, kerosene, right? So you see the problem, and then what happens if you can't then stop fraud?
Then we lose a lot of money, and the insurance industry, it collapses across the nation.
And that collapses across the nation, like ask homeowners insurance policyholders in Florida right now how that's going, right? Okay, so you see how we've taken that from it's important, we've given it practical clothing, we've said, look, this is a reason why it's important. Now, we do have to make a very, very narrow distinction here that preserves your argument, but I need y'all to stay with me because the shift is really important. When you say that their promise, can you say they promised not to plow it under, and that's material, and because they didn't do it, we shouldn't have to pay the policy?
Say that they
That it is a promise. You're winning on condition. If the court says this is a condition, you walk, and you've already made your great arguments for that, right?
Yeah, because if they gave up on that promise, the court wouldn't be able to interpret what the damages to us giving them the policy is anyways.
Right, and we're gonna, because it's so important, we're gonna call that material. We're gonna call that a material breach. Y'all, I'm gonna say it now. Get it straight in your head, because here we go. We are crossing the streams. We're talking about conditions versus promises, right? Never the twain shall meet. This is the first time we see the big one. It is a condition. Write this one down. It is a condition. A condition of each party's obligation to perform under the contract that there be no prior material, uncured breach of a promise of that contract. We are taking a breach of a promise and making it into a condition. And most of my job in this class and next class is explaining what the hell that's doing in there. I'll say it again. It shall be, and this is in the restatement, it is a condition of each party's obligation to perform under the contract that there be no prior uncured material, that's 3, prior uncured material. Prior uncured material breach of a promise by the other party. Now, to get to why that's the case, we're going to see that when we get to Jacobs and Young versus Kent, which we will. But I need to show you this from the outset so that you don't think that like Liam is getting confused here. He's made 2 conditional arguments. 2 conditioned arguments. Conditioned argument 1 is an express condition. Your argument rests on what express condition?
That they would not plow the field after damage happened.
Right, and why is that an express condition?
Because we wrote it down.
Because you wrote it down that way. Now, you're making your second argument. What argument is that?
It's that the entire contract was framed around them agreeing to the things we wanted in exchange for the things they want.
Right. And that, did they do the things you wanted?
No.
Were they important?
Yes.
What did that do?
It removed me from my obligation.
It removed me from my obligation. Do you see how their breach of a contract provision excused performance? That's a condition, excused performance. It's a breach of a problem. Is that an express condition? No, it's an implied condition. We're doing just like we did for the interpretation. We said express and implied warranties, remember that? Now we're doing express and implied conditions. And there's express, just like with express and implied warranties, they're kind of easy once you see it. What's an express condition? Like what's an express warranty? It's what you wrote down. It's what you wrote down. What are the implied conditions? What are the implied warranties? Well, the implied warranties are 2314, 2315. Fine, we had to go through that. What are the implied conditions? It shall be a condition of any party's obligation to perform under a contract that there be no prior uncured material breach by the other party. That's our big implied condition. We've just done this bridge from express to implied. Okay, those are our 2 arguments. Nail them on both. Is this an express condition?
No.
No, obviously not. Why?
Well, they did not write in paragraph 5F.
They didn't write in paragraph 5F. Liam, just so we can get back up. Liam, what's your response to that?
I mean, if you look at the entire contract and the language behind it, it's pretty, the condition is implicated into 5F.
Right, it's implicated, but not obvious, right? We go back and forth and back and forth. I am bored to tears with this particular back and forth. Why? How do you think every insurance contract reads now?
You just do whatever's most favorable for the policy holder.
Which is?
Is a condition that
You just start, like, if you make me do this, this is like our, like when we said disclaimers have to be obvious. Well, then every word now in every contract is like in all caps and bolded and glowing and flashing 1990s website aesthetics, right? That's going on there. Okay. Similar thing going on here. Like, I get it. We can go back and forth and say, like, it was in the paragraph, it wasn't in the paragraph, it was in the heading, but it wasn't. All you're going to do is make that when ChatGPT writes these insurance contracts for the insurers, it's just going to be put, it is an express condition of insurer's obligation to pay under this policy. That, next sentence, it is an express condition of insurance. Jesus, like, can you imagine? Okay, I get it. It's clear. It's understandable. It's a set of legal arguments, but you can imagine how it just bores you to tears as a human. Everybody get it? Cool. The harder question is the latter one. How are we going to go with that?
What was the latter?
That this is a material breach of contract, that there be no prior uncured material breach of contract is an express condition of their obligation to pay. Or an implied condition, damn it. See, now I'm doing it. It's an implied condition of their obligation to pay. Was it important?
Was it?
How material was it? They're saying it's central to the contract, super central to the contract, that you not plow it under. So important that if you don't do it, they forfeit their insurance policy. Now, you got a couple things you can say about being forced to forfeit an insurance policy. First of all, has no impact on the law at all, but what are the things you're going to say about the insurance policy that just immediately puts the insurance company on the back foot? You guys will either be arguing with insurance lawyers or you will be insurance lawyers. Either way, that is your practice. Welcome. Hi. So get this argument going either way. What's got the insurance company on the back foot of this argument saying, like, oh, it's super important. The purpose of the contract is that you not plow it under.
I guess if it was so important, should they have come via check with you as soon as they timely filed their?
So one, you might have come and checked things a little faster if it was so important.
Well, to go off of that, it was recommended by the Department of
There we go.
to plow over to avoid pests.
Wait a minute.
And then should have been no.
Yeah, like which by the way, if there had been pests and pests had destroyed crops, then right, then you would have had to insure the later crops that would have had to be destroyed by pests. So you're going against guidance from the state on what to do in order to keep. Probably not the most important thing. Can you get around though Liam's excellent argument? What's your best argument remaining though about like whether it was a good idea to plow it under or not, whether the state said it or not? What's the problem with plowing it under?
We can't ascertain what the damage is actually.
You're destroying evidence essentially, right? And is there any way you can get around that argument to say, well, what was important about the insurance contract is, and I know this is shocking, that the crops be insured. That's the most important point. Oh, and by the way, Your Honor, we've also been paying them for months. And if you think you don't bring all the receipts for all the payments you've made for the service they're not providing, right? That begins to really put the insurance company on the back foot. But then you have to get back to this. If this isn't a prior uncured material breach, or is this just like a little thing?
I mean, I guess I would argue it's a little thing.
It's a little thing. How could they show fraud if you plow the stuff under? What was the damage from?
The damage was from heavy rains. They could look at the heavy rains.
Like a television, like fucking get on the internet or something. Like I don't know what I've forgotten when this. I'm so mad I forgot when this case was. But like, go look something up. Ask somebody, right? Ask somebody. Get on television. Look. Maybe it was a sunny day that day. Like there are other ways of saying that the thing that they're claiming is nonsense. What's another way of checking to see this, Chris?
It's not a novel issue. This happens all the time.
Oh shit! So excited I'm losing my pen. Right? So it's not a novel issue.
This happens all the time. You literally, like you said, go down the street and see what's happening.
Right, like go down the street. How'd you check the neighboring farms? Right? Find out like, oh, are you maybe not wanting to pay this insurance policy because all the other farms in the area are claiming on the same insurance policy? Maybe it wasn't fraud, right?
Just say like the proof itself, like it's in the pudding. Like why would they do all of that rather than like have to resew do the whole thing all over?
Right, so yeah, the idea that they've gone to a lot of cost. It's not at all clear that they were going to. It's not at all clear that they were going to get payment under this policy, right? They took a risk, but they took a risk to mitigate future stuff. There's a bunch of other stuff. Any other ways you can go after this? I mean, the going down the street one was was a big one. Just go look, listen to the radio, anything. Okay, look, y'all. I just want you to see the two arguments. What I want you to take out of this is that there are two arguments around conditions: one express, one implied. We are leaving the express zone, as we usually do, even though most conditions are express. We are leaving it because all you can say is, yeah, if it says express condition, then the court's going to treat it as an express condition. Like, okay. But I can't really tell you anything about it. I can tell you that when it's ambiguous, because the parties did engage in some drafting shenanigans, because when it's in between, the case does stand for the principle that a court will prefer a promise interpretation rather than a condition, because the condition leads to forfeiture. And in an insurance case, that's true twice on Sundays, right? Whereas everywhere else it's true. For insurance cases, like, holy damn, it's true. And that's what describes the case. Any questions about this one before we move on? Cool. Yeah, Nate.
So just a promise would, if something is judged to be a promise, it would allow a partial breach, that you could still kind of work through.
We're going to get into the language of partial or material breach.
I guess the contract can still be patched in other ways.
Yeah, and that they might try to fix it. Whereas if the condition happened, performance is just off. We're not doing it. Make sense? And that's why I started with this whole long rant about what are the stakes in conditions versus promises. And this case really helps you see the stakes. If it's a promise, then yeah, like they got to say we had to go to extra effort to prove fraud, because it turns out that we had to interview all of your neighbors, and none of them saw a rain cloud that day, right? You could imagine a case where they could still win it on that ground, but saying like we had to go to a lot of effort, extra effort to do it. But that's a different set of cases. Okay, so that's Howard. And then we are going to move into what we have been doing all along. All right, first of all, I just want to lay out the big one. The big one that we've already had you write down, so you don't need to do it again, is Restatement 237. Restatement 237 says, it is a condition of each party's remaining duties to render performances to be exchanged under an exchange of promises that there be no uncured material failure by the other party to render any such performance due at an earlier time. You like how I compressed that down to prior uncured material breach? All right, order of performance then under 234, that's 237 we just did, under 234.2, you should know, where the performance of only one party under an exchange requires a period of time, his performance is due at an earlier time than that of the other party. Why does that rule matter? Like, that sounds like just a pile of legalese, and it's 2:18 in the afternoon, and I've started to drone on, and you didn't hear a word I just said, which is cool, but like, I need you to see this. Why does it matter that when we say one party's performance takes a period of time and the other party doesn't? How does that map to like our everyday? Yeah.
And there's like a service that is ongoing, and then when it's done, you pay that.
When it's done, you pay. So payment for service. Let's do it again. When else is one party's performance take time and the other party's performance basically doesn't? Although, have you seen our banking system? Installment contracts, right? Where you're paying for something, their work is happening over time. Although that's a place where payment actually might have to come first before the second installment, right? So that's a place where failure to pay after the first installment might excuse the installer's later installments, because that was payment due at a prior time. But normally, construction, right? It takes a while, then you pay, John?
The law.
What's that?
Lawyers.
Lawyers in general, right? So everything takes a while, and then you pay. Yeah. Loans and money, it's weird. That's such a great point. money is like deemed to be instant, is the point that we're trying to make here in 234.2. Money is deemed to be instant. Now, I've got some bad news for all of you, by the way. We are not a first world country when it comes to our banking system. You cannot get money to anyone else's account anywhere in the world within about an hour. As Americans, you can't. Now, almost every other country, you can. It's wild. But we still think, as a matter of the common law, that payment is fast, work is slow. Here's the other scenario. And the fact that banks are considered fast and performance is considered slow obfuscates this, because it does, in fact, take about a week and a half to get money to, like, New Zealand, for example. Ask me how I know. And it takes about that amount of time to do a wire transfer and then have it processed through the system. And yet it takes, a couple weeks to get something shipped to you. But it's shipping. For the UCC, shipping something to somebody is considered to take time. Paying for it is not. So unless the contract says otherwise, unless the contract says that there's a time for payment earlier, then the goods have to arrive in good condition before the obligation to pay for them arises. Those are the two things that really give 234.2 its bite. That when we say it is a condition, an implied condition of each party's obligations under a contract, that there need be no prior, that's what we're talking about now, uncured material breach. We did a little bit on material. We haven't done uncured yet, right? Prior, though, is where we're focusing. And prior is determined by if one party takes a minute and the other party can do it right away. The party who takes a minute has to go first. And that includes shipping products. So usually this rule goes in favor of buyers over sellers. The seller has to get the stuff there before the buyer has to pay, unless the contract says otherwise. Or also services. So now we've done goods and services, and in both cases, the provider of the goods or services usually is the one that has to do the thing, unless they say otherwise, before the other party has to pay, which is considered to be instant, unless it's not, right? Unless you're on an installment plan, in which case these rules could absolutely apply to the seller, who doesn't have to send you the next installment if the buyer hasn't paid for the first one. Okay? I need you to see this. This is all we're going to do. There's not a lot more to learn here. There's nothing else to learn. That's it. It is an implied condition of each party's obligations under a contract that there be no prior uncured material breach by the other party. Now we're going to just play out the ramifications of that. Any questions on that before we move on? That's all you need to know. Now we're just going to look at some specific cases that take you places you might not have thought of. Yeah, Tully. Yeah, 230. Well, the big rule is 237. The order of performance rule is 234. And then what is a material breach? Liam's question is 253.2. And that has to do with repudiation and material breach. But what I really need you to see is 237 and 234.2. Those are the big ones. All right, so now we're going to get into K&G and material breach, dependent versus independent promises. And I am going to ask Lauren to set it up, and then Leland will take the other side. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Are we gonna do more?
What's that? Are we going to do more? Oh, damn. Yeah, no, we should do more, and you're right. Sorry, got excited. Yeah, that's because this one makes my teeth itch. Yeah, okay, cool. This one gets tested a fair amount. Thanks for the reminder. Let's go ahead and do this one. I'll just do one at a time then. Lauren, I'll ask you to set up more, and sorry for messing with you. If we do more, set up more, and then I'll ask Leland to move forward on the next case.
Okay.
So go for it with more.
So in Warren, General Motors hired Baystone Construction to build a new addition to its Chevrolet factory in Indiana.
Yep.
From there, Baystone hired Warren Building Products Company,
Yep.
Warren, to complete the aluminum walls for the addition. According to the contract, the walls were to be made out of mill finished aluminum, and this type of aluminum has an uneven appearance and its raw characteristics. The contract was subject to General Motors' approval of Warren's work. So Moran completed the work, and GM went out to check it out, and in a certain angle in the sunlight, it did not appear uniform. And so General
Love
Motors
it.
rejected it and hired someone else to do it, which then the work was deemed acceptable.
Perfect.
They so then refused to pay more than the balance of the contract, which was $23,000, and Moran won at the trial court. And now
Okay.
it's appealed.
Okay. Let's do a few black letter sort of house cleaning things, and then we're going to move into the real guts of it. What's this doing in the book? Express or implied condition.
They're testing how to apply this expressed condition based on the reasonable satisfaction or the actual satisfaction test.
Right, okay. So what we're talking about here are a specific kind of condition that's a particularly nasty one, and it's called an aesthetics approval clause, or just an approval clause. Now, I've added aesthetics approval actually as a way of making it even stronger. I know people are like, aesthetics, that must mean there's not really any real bite to it. No, aesthetics even begins to give it some bite, because if we just call this an approval clause, I will pay you for your work on my building if I feel like it. Where are we? I can see right through my hand again. We're back in the first week of class. That's not a contract. There's no deal here at all. By the way, if there's no contract, then where are we left? What kind of craziness ensues?
Promissory estoppel.
Yeah, or worse. Yeah, tell me about that. It's going to be a restitution claim. Why?
Well, because you don't have a contract, but one party still got.
But you still installed the crappy siding, right? So you got to get paid for the siding. All right, you get the point. You get the point. Okay, so this is an express clause, but the clause is so wishy-washy, is so vague that we're left in we're all the way over here towards illusory. Or what are we going to say about it being illusory? That the aesthetics approval clause is not illusory. Talia. Good faith, right? That's our answer all the way across the board. The idea is we have to believe you, and that's, by the way, it turns out to be what Judge Posner's really doing in this case, right? We have to believe you. We have to believe you when you say that you do or do not approve. Now, can we tie this to any other theories of the course? What's the difference between this? What are our standards? What's the court picking between?
The objective reasonable satisfaction test
And the
subjective aesthetics test.
I love it when something comes together, right? So again, we're right back in Lucy versus Amer, objective versus subjective all over again. Just to remind you how important, critical, and misleading if you believe it entirely, the objective theory of contract is, give me an obvious subjective approval clause that you would be like, yup.
Give me a painting, and if I like it, I'll pay you, but if I don't pay you.
So if I like it, I'll pay you. You're close. What kind of painting? What kind of painting is likely to get that enforced?
A nice one?
A nice one? A portrait? Who said portrait? Why?
It was the example used in the case, but also because, a portrait has more subjective value.
Yeah. It's not, look, you might
You
think,
could paint a landscape and everybody might, it's more commonly agreed that might look nice, but if you paint me, then it's
Right,
my
like-
thought that determines the value.
yeah, I am not, I like getting up and yelling. I am not photogenic. I've always, every picture is like me doing this, right? Pete Duton is my ancient enemy. Every time he shows up at a conference, he gets me going full Phantom of the Opera. So aesthetics approval clauses matter when it's the person's honest, good faith, subjective approval that is being contracted for, right? Do we do it under the objective theory of contract or under some mutant subjective theory of contract? The answer is no. We have articulated reasons to pick between these two driving theories. All right. So, what's the court side here?
The court employs the reasonable satisfaction standard.
Yep.
Because the aesthetic purpose was not the primary reason for the contract. It was for, a factory, which is not very aesthetic in my opinion. It's also essentially impossible to have a uniform finish with this type of aluminum. So having Morin bound by this approval is just ridiculous and illusory.
Well, I mean, if it's not illusory, you don't want it to be illusory, right? If it's illusory, what happens? There's no contract, right? But what do you want to say about this, though, as a condition? We're playing games with the content of the condition. Do you see that? We're swapping out the meaning, the internal meaning of the competition. What does it do by making it an objective interpretation of the condition rather than a subjective interpretation of the condition? What does it do if we switch to an objective interpretation of the condition?
They did the work, so they should be paid.
Yeah, they did the work, they should be paid. Leland?
I just also find it funny that it says in the case that the approved replacement wall had the same issue.
Yeah, right. And then they're like, so look, at this point, Talia, do you believe the factory person giving the approval? Does anybody believe this guy? Like, do you see that? Like, that's what's going on in the case. At this point, we've done some development, we've worked into the case, which is amazing because Judge Posner's normally like, you wrote the contract, I'm going to enforce it, efficiency, right? He's sort of, he's like, yeah, I don't believe you either, right? Got to do some work. Okay, what are the factors on the bar exam, on my exam? And you can do this when you go look at some of my sales exams. They're going to give you a sense as to whether or not an aesthetics approval clause is going to be deemed under the subjective theory or under the objective theory. What kind of factors am I going to put given that I have a wicked mind? But no, I do want to signpost this for you clearly. What kinds of things in a building? By the way, it's got to be a building, right? Why? It's not movable, no?
Because like the buildings have certain necessary
Objective features, and they have certain inevitable subjective features, right? And I can just play games with that all day long. So what kind of features am I going to put in my building? I'm not promising that it'll always be a building, like you could imagine it with a product, but whatever. What kind of features are you going to put into it to sort of drive you down that subjective rabbit hole? Say, yeah, no, this clearly works for subjective.
The purpose of the building is to like serve an aesthetic function.
Yeah.
It's not just like a factory, it's like the symphony opera house or something.
Love it, right? Symphony opera house. What's the ultimate subjective? Just like the ultimate picture is a portrait, the ultimate subjective preference is someone's home. I'm going to play games with that all day long, right? If it's somebody's home, a house, residential. Hey, where have we heard that divide before? Residential real estate being treated fundamentally different from commercial properties, right? So I'm going to put a taste of personal use residential. Okay, what am I going to do though? Because I'm never going to just ask that question. That would be easy. What am I going to do though to give it this objective flavor? Yeah.
I assume the building has to meet certain dimensions, like the wraparound porch has to be this.
Well, that would be beyond, like, I mean, it has to be up to code, right? So you could just give it hard lines that the building doesn't comport with. But that's going to be a building code inspection. That's not going to be just a general aesthetics approval clause. Yeah.
Like a rental or investment?
Yeah, all I got to do is take your pretty little home and make it a residential or investment property. I literally did this on one of my sales exams. You can go find it, in which I basically took the example of the people building the house next to my parents' house in Fairport, Virginia, right down on the Chesapeake, in which they installed this glowing, beautiful gold-like copper roof, or copper-style roof, on property that's like hurricane threatened right against the water. Like, it was clearly an objectively poor decision. Subjectively, though, you're like, well, do I, like, if, let's say somebody put that roof on that was like, this is what I wanted, it's objectively a bad idea, it's subjectively what I wanted, maybe the court's going to go back and forth on whether or not this was a commercial property or whether, like, I'll let you do the dumb thing. Look, does anybody think I can't actually contract for a 30-foot tall hot pink statue of Darth Vader in my backyard. You see, I can do it. And I can have an aesthetics approval clause saying that Darth Vader has to meet certain characteristics, that sense of pink menace, right? The whole idea of the ludicrousness of the juxtaposition. That whole thing, that's aesthetic. It's an object of art. It's something I want. It is determined subjectively. If I say I don't like it, you can imagine Judge Posner might believe me, right? Might believe me. Here, not a chance. Any questions about the case? Sweet. All right, then moving on to Leland and implied and constructive conditions and K&G construction versus Harris. Take it away.
Okay, so in this one, K&G is the contractor and Harris is the subcontractor. They have a whole agreement lined up with certain conditions, including subcontractor having liability insurance, subcontractor doing work without delay, doing work in a workmanlike manner. Up to the point of the incident, the contractor is satisfied with the subcontractor's work, but then the subcontractor does this fun thing where they destroy a wall of the house with a bulldozer. It's the day before their monthly payday when this happens, and so the next day the contractor doesn't pay the subcontractor. They're telling them, hey, you have liability insurance, you need to use that to take care of this problem, either like fixing the wall or paying for the damages of the wall. Subcontractor's insurance denies the claim. Subcontractor doesn't want to pay it. They continue doing work for a little over a month for basically free, like without having been paid on that August 10th payday. And then contractor, they start withholding work. Contractor sues for damages and breach of contract. Subcontractor is arguing, no, like insurance says it's not our fault. You didn't pay us. You owe us money. Contractor saying you did damage plus I had to pay extra to make up for you not finishing the job. Court is kind of having this like battle of words as to like whether it's a dependent or independent promise.
And we'll talk about that. Yeah, well done. Go ahead.
Very clearly dependent promise because you do work, I pay you.
Yeah.
And so with it being a dependent promise, court rules that the damage to the wall was the first breach of contract. They are not performing in a workmanlike manner, and then not the contractor gives them like what's it called? It's like a soft hold or something like that, where it's like we're not going to pay you, but we're giving you the opportunity to fix this, and then we can continue the contract.
Yep.
And subcontractor, when they decide to stop doing the work, that's another breach of contract, and so court gives the contractor damages for the extra cost they had.
Okay, boy, there's so much to get through in this, and we only have about 10 minutes, so we'll get started, maybe continue on next time. But let's just take this as it stands. First of all, I need you to see how we're going to have to do some real wild stuff with the law to get here. But I want you to keep track of what's likely to happen, and I want it to resonate in your soul as like, of course this is how it works. So I hire you to do work on my property, and I'm paying in installments, and you slam a bulldozer into my house, and you have insurance, and you say, look, either you need to fix my wall, and either your insurance needs to pay for it or you do, and because you haven't done the work that I asked you to, and plus you did this damage, I'm not going to pay you the amounts that I owe you until you get it fixed. Now, I am going to give you an opportunity to get it fixed, because what we both want is for this to get fixed and for us to go through with our mutually beneficial exchange. But if you don't get off your duff having been told to do that and get it fixed, then I'm going to say, all right, that's it. You have materially breached the contract. Now, look, we're going to do a lot of work on these cases coming up, but I want you to see that pattern. What we've done here is we've talked about breach. We've talked about dependent versus independent promises. Independent promises are little dinky things. Dependent promises are our material ones. So we've done that already. We've talked about whether it's prior, whose obligation to go first. Why does the work have to be done before you pay them?
Because we pay you for the work.
Because we pay you for the work.
It's a condition of you getting paid.
It's a condition, but what makes it a condition that, for example, of them doing the work that you not pay them? And this becomes the big problem in these cases. Why does the work have to be done first? If the contract doesn't say otherwise.
Because of restatement 234.
Yeah, because, tell me.
Time to do the work versus payment for the instantaneous.
Bingo. So if they don't say it in the contract when the payments are due, then the obligation to do the work comes first. That's kind of what Leland's intimating. But that's not what's going on. We're in an Aiden situation here where they're making periodic payments. And this is the threat of these cases. Notice, let's try this again. Who breached this contract? Dun, dun. With Jaws, I'm going to start making the noise. Dun, 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 dun. Who breached this contract? Yeah, why? Because they stopped paying. Now, all I need you to do is see that a court could have gone, yeah. Yeah. That's all I need you to see. These cases aren't obvious. Your client is not going to want to pay. You need to tell them that although you are a superb lawyer, there are about even odds that unless you take some good steps, they are going to be the ones who have in fact breached. If you withhold payment, and if payment is due under an installment contract, right? If we're under 234.2, we're fine. But if payment has been due and is due and you don't pay for work they have done, guess who breached? And guess who then is on the hook for their consequential and other damages, right? Be careful. Do not get high on your own supply with respect to these cases. These cases will tell you, so-and-so breached first. That is an outcome of the case. That is not a fact of the case. Do you see that? And these cases can almost all go the other way. By the way, what do you do about it? Let's make it simple again. You see one of these circumstances, you start sending nastygrams saying, I noticed you've breached, I need you to get it fixed. If you don't get it fixed within a set period of time, we are going to treat this as an uncured material breach of contract, and payments will, as of that point, cease. What you've done is you've given them their opportunity to cure. That's what this whole conversation about, hey, there was a period of time where it was clear that they breached by driving a bulldozer into a wall. But what wasn't clear was that they weren't going to get the problem fixed. That period of cure is a part of our dance back and forth. I want you to just hear the natural progression. I'll say it again, because these cases sort of mimic different parts. It's like snapshots within this natural progression, but they almost all follow it. There's a breach by one party, or something that could count as a breach. There's a breach by the other party, or something that could count as a breach. The parties send each other nastygrams talking about whether the fact that they got to get there, that they got to pull it together. They don't. Then each party deems that this material has ripened into a material breach, whether it's a lack of payment. Did that ripen into a material breach once they didn't pay up? Or did the not getting the wall fixed? Was that what happens? And then you get to the end of the case, and if you have a terrible lawyer, you flip a coin. And just like, okay, which party was the one that was held to have breached first? Unless you've got 234.2 on your side, you are in some hot water. And that's what's really going on in all these cases. It's not really who breached first. It's what arguments can you make that the other party, in fact, did the material breach first. This is the thing you're not supposed to do in relationships, right? Like if somebody comes to you and says like, you did this thing, you're like, you're not supposed to say, yeah, but you did it last week, so now we're even, right? Like that's not how you stay in a relationship. I should take my own advice. That's not how any of that works. This is very much where you are invited to do that. You're like, no, you did it first. Like, you just take your worst instincts in being in a relationship and bring them to court. You did it first, therefore I don't have to perform. My failure to perform, yeah, I didn't pay you. My failure to perform was excused by your prior uncured material breach. To which their response is going to be, nuh-uh. Right? My failure to perform was premised on your prior. Okay, you get the whole point. All right, so that's the major thing that's going on here. Now, let's deal with these dependent and independent promises because these are going to come out here. What's a dependent promise? What's an independent promise?
An independent promise is either time fixed for performance, performance is minor part of overall consideration, or performance is expressly made independent if
Okay, so there's a couple of these. It's a small deal. It's a small deal, not a big deal. We're going to see that in a very famous case, Jacobs and Young versus Kent. It's a small deal, or it's not part of the overall performance, or it has been included in what I will call, and here it's unfortunately it overlaps in my mind. I sometimes mistake it for a my way or the highway clause. That is not what we were talking about here. This is a hell or high water clause. You must perform under this obligation come hell or high water, meaning our obligations are independent. You still have to perform if I breach. Independent. So you can say it in a hell or high water clauses. Hell or high water clauses are really standard in some industries. We don't have time to get into why. If anybody here is working in the finance lease sector, come talk to me afterwards. Hell or high water clauses are so common, they're standard in the finance lease sector. And I can explain why. But until then, I just need you to know you can make promises independent by putting it in the contract. Big surprise, you can make anything true in a contract by putting it in the contract. And this is true there too. That's because at common law, at old common law, all promises used to be independent. You can imagine how that would stick in people's craw, right? Like, I owe you 100 pounds, although that's probably enough to buy like, most of Sussex at the time we were developing this, stuff. You ever read these like ancient aristocrats? They're like, yes, on the substantial sum of 3 pounds a year. And you're like, what the hell's going on here? Right, so these promise, like, let's say that I promised for a certain amount of money to do a thing. The thing doesn't happen, I would still have to pay the money and then sue them because they didn't do the thing. That is not the way the law works now. It's basically just a kind of a playground sense of intuitions. It is wild to expect somebody to perform on a contract where the other party has stopped performing on the contract. And the only problem with that is, yeah, but who did it first? And that's your relationship problem. Like, we just go back and forth. We can't really solve that issue very well in any of these cases. So that was the old common law rule. That'll help us understand Jacobs and Young versus Kent. The old common law rule was that promises were just independent. And so I would have to pay you 3 pounds, and you would have to come up with the carriage. And if you didn't come up with the carriage, I still paid you the 3 pounds. I would sue you to get my 3 pounds back. And you can imagine how like unsatisfying that was to everybody, which is why we have the law that has evolved substantially to this point. Okay, that's what dependent and independent clauses are. Any further and also I think that largely disposes of the case. What I need you to see out of the case is it looks obvious, isn't obvious. Looks obvious. Driving it into the wall was bad. That's material. Prior, maybe because of 234.2. Prior, uncured, they didn't fix it. Okay, I'm seeing it now. Prior, uncured, material, breach. All right, I don't have to pay. But it's real easy to flip that one and make the payment the first. Look, let's try this. Let's say that they plowed under your azaleas. Anybody confident saying, yeah, they hit one of your flowering shrubs with that bulldozer? Anybody here confident saying, you don't have to pay anymore for the whole rest of the contract? Is that the advice you've given your client? Good, I have gotten through, right? I need you to see that that's the real risk, because what happens if they did plow one of your azaleas under? We heard that like plowing things under, right, was like a material breach of contract. That was our whole back and forth here, like just a minute ago. And here, like, under the, like under the precedent of, like plowing things under, clearly material breach of contract. They hit an azalea, you stop paying on a construction deal. What happens to your client? They sue you. They don't only sue you, that's bad. What else happens? What do they have the right to do if they're right and you're wrong? For the completion of the contract? What are they not obligated to do? Yeah. They literally can just down tools and stop work. You gotta watch this. Sometimes people, and this especially is true of construction, but you can see it in all long-term ongoing relationships. One party gets in a high dudgeon because the other party did something like, oh, that's a material breach. And like, I listened to the first half of a lecture of contracts, not the second half. And so I'm going to call the whole thing off. And you're like, no, don't do that, dude, because if you do, they're going to stop. And you might be in hot water. Like now imagine you got to go pay somebody else twice as much to get the job done. And are you going to be recovering that? If you were the one in breach of contract? No, sir, you will not. You will not be recovering that, and worse, they're going to sue you for unjust enrichment for any amounts that they performed and you haven't paid for. And the court's likely to defrost it at you. That's what I need you to see. It's got a theoretical basis, independent promises, either because we said they're independent, because they're not, or because they're not a big deal. Do not excuse the other party's performance. Both parties have to perform. If they want to sue at the end to sort that out, they can sue at the end to sort that out. But what we're really talking is your mid-contract performance. One party screw up, lets the other party be like, nope, not doing this anymore. And that one looks clean, isn't clean. Go look under the surface. Immediately look for how your suspension of performance might be the real breach, because that's the threat. Thanks, folks. We'll pick this up next time.